Welcome to this introductory video on the combat system for Dungeons of Yendor Megagame. What you can see here is a typical surface map from the Megagame, and the map is divided up into map areas. So when we talk about areas, it is these spaces here are areas. Each area has a capacity. This is the number of units. These are units that can be accommodated by this area. It's divided up in that where it's here it says 10 units. That would be either 10 units of the King's Army and 10 units of underground peoples. So it's possible for a total of 20 to be in a space like this. And if there were, it would be quite an epic battle. But most of the time it will be a good deal less than that. In between each area are arrows. These mark the capacity of the various tunnels, doorways, gateways, whatever, to handle movement between areas. Each arrow represents passage for 2 units. So in this case, the Chapel of Elves moving into the south chamber, a total of 4 units can be moved per turn from one chamber to the other. Note that this is an absolute capacity for one side. So the King's Army can move 4 units and underground people can move 4 units. It's also an absolute limit for each side, in that having moved 4 units, say from here to here, you cannot move another 4 units from here to here. Neither can you move some units in that have moved from somewhere else through that same space. And we will have some counters to mark when the capacity has been used up in the turn. This is a severe restriction on movement, and it's entirely deliberate. It's the nature of moving large bodies of troops in cramped and underground conditions. In general, the maps are not run or adjudicated fully by the control team. It's a small team and a large game. We expect the players to run this themselves. You should all be able to run this, and I'll help give you hints as we go through on how best to do that. So let's start with the turn sequence. Phase 1 of each turn starts with march order, and this is potentially quite important. Each army, each force decides its order of march, and it does this by stacking the counters in a pile. And the counter on the top, the unit on the top, represents the first unit in the lead. And you will see how important this is in a moment. So here we are setting up a battle between the City Watch and some free folk, orcs to some. Having stacked, and it's important here not to move anything, to stack your units, we then move on to phase 2, morale. Now, this particular map is on the surface and its layout is well known. It's not an unknown territory. But for the sake of this example, we will assume that this temple is incredibly mysterious, and therefore moving into another area is an unknown area. So, how do we do that? Let's work through the City Watch first to demonstrate how this works. There are 3 numbers on each counter. These represent the melee value, the shooting value, and the bravery value, in that order. And so, in order to move from one area to another, you must test against their bravery to see if they'll go. So let's find out what happens with these 2 groups of watchmen, each in 2 different areas. So we'll start with this group, and they're intending to move into another area. They'll probably be going into this area. So we'll find out what they do. So morale, that's rolled a 2. His bravery is 3. He's fine. That's all the die rolling you need to do, because as soon as the lead unit goes, all the other units under it will go and follow like sheep. So we know that that's going to move. Their friends across the corridor, they also have passed their test. No, they haven't passed their test. They've rolled a 5. So they need to get a 3 or under. So the lead unit has decided it doesn't want to go into the mysterious chamber, so we turn it over. We then go to the next unit in order. No, they don't like it either, so we turn them over. And let's see what the final unit wants to do. Nope, none of them want to go. So they have all balked. They can try again next turn, but at this point they're refusing to go through that door into that terrible north chamber. At this point, you're checking your morale. You don't move anything. You just decide who can move. On the Free Folk side, their lead unit is the Big Chiefs boys. The Big Chiefs boys have got a bravery of 6. They need to roll a 6 or less on an ordinary dice, which means they are automatically going to go into the next area. So they're pretty happy with that. So none of them are turned over. So we've established the state of morale. Phase 3 is for miners, engineers and diggers. Well, we're not going to do defences or engineers in this example, so we'll skip over phase 3. Phase 4 is movement. And this is important. Movement is simultaneous. This is not an I go, you go game, otherwise we'll take all day over one game turn. And so it's quite important that everybody plays in the spirit of this, and that we don't see hours being spent while players decide what they're going to do, to optimise, to work out the best possible combination of things, to min-max their next action. The game will not wait for that to happen. If maps are taking too long, Control will intervene and speed things along, either by forbidding movement or by making some sort of arbitrary cut-off. However, I'm sure, and we found this in experience, that players will play nice at the map and cooperate and play in the spirit of the game. If you want to be absolutely sure, then you can choose to write a short note on a piece of paper saying what your intended move is, what route you're going to take and so on. But most of the time the trust system works pretty well. So we're going to do movement. In the rules, Free Folk and Watchmen can move 3 areas per turn. And so what we're going to do, I know what they're going to do. They're basically going to run into each other. Now, because it's simultaneous movement, we want to stagger it so that we get to see what happens at each stage. It's easy in this case because both move at 3, so we can move 1 area at a time. So we can start with the Watchmen. The Watchmen move 3 areas. Their plan is to move into North Chamber, South Chamber, and head off the Free Folk. We've already established that this group are not frightened, and this group is frightened, so isn't going to move. So in accordance with their instructions, their first part of their 3 area move would be into North Chamber. Free Folk, intending to thrash the Watchmen, are similarly intend to move into South Chamber, then North Chamber. However, there are 7 Free Folk units in the Garden of Tranquility at the moment, and there are only 2 arrows between the Garden and the South Chamber, meaning only 4 of the 7 units can go, the first 4 in the stack. This is why stack ordering is important. The first 4 can go in. That's now used up that transit, which means that the ones left behind can't move through that route until next turn. They could have gone by an alternate route, but we'll skip that for the moment. The individual characters move through, and they are not boundaried by the passageway because they're just a single person rather than a large group of people. So the first part, both sides move into opposite chambers, and their intention is to move across each other. What cannot happen, must not happen, does not happen, is that they move there and these move there. That's just silly. So what we do is we look at what happens on the boundary. So there are a number of ways of deciding who goes first, where we fight the battle, but keep it simple. In general, the larger force moves into the area of the smaller force. If both forces are equal, you might choose to roll a dice for where the battle takes place, or you might come to some agreement. I'm sure you can work it out. but whatever happens, the battle will take place in a space, not on a boundary. This is quite important. So as it happens, the watch have 3 units and the free folk have 4 units. So we're going to fight the battle in the north chamber. And they've moved in to face each other off. So that's movement completed. The next phase of this is shooting. So let's have a look and see what we've got. Well, City Watch are very well armed with crossbow and archers. The free folk are not really into archers or crossbow, but they do have some javelins, which are slightly less effective. So at this stage you pick targets. So for the sake of argument, what we're going to say is that the crossbow will fire on this unit, the archers will fire on this unit, these 2 will fire on that unit, this one will fire on that unit. Allocate who you're firing at before you roll the dice. This is important because it allows you to have to think ahead of it. So what's going to happen? Shooting, crossbow, 3 or less is a hit. For the bow, 2 or less is a hit. Crossbow fire, shoot rather, don't hit. The archers shoot, don't hit. The free folk need to get a 1 or less, and missed, and that one missed, and that one missed. So nobody hit. If somebody had been hit, then they would have had to roll for morale. If they had failed to pass their bravery check, having been hit, then they can't take part in the melee that follows. However, in this case, archery had been hopelessly ineffective. One of the things that I haven't mentioned yet, and because this is not an underground area, are torches. In order for an area to be lit, you have to have a torch. A torch is represented by these yellow blocks, and if you don't have a torch, if you're unlit, then you cannot shoot. For some reason, it's inordinately difficult to hit things with a bow and arrow in pitch blackness. Who knew? So, the other thing to watch for with shooting is armour. Some targets are armoured. In this case, we have the big chief's boys have got an armour icon. This reduces the chance of them taking a hit by 1. And it's worthwhile remembering that, or at least pointing out to your opponent that you're armoured when we come to roll the dice. So, melee. As I said, nobody failed their morale check for having been taken hits from being shot at. And melee is not compulsory. It might be fun, but it's not compulsory. This means that if both sides reach this point and for some reason or other decide they don't really want to fight it out, because maybe they're both pretty exhausted, or maybe they've just had a little chat, or maybe some gold has changed hands, who knows. You don't have to fight if you don't want to. In this case, everybody can fight, and they really, really want to fight because I said so. So this is simple. We take the melee number, which is the first number, and it's the same thing. You roll that number or less on an ordinary dice to see how many hits. So let's first of all see how many hits the watchmen do. The crossbowmen and the archers have a 3 or less, so crossbowmen missed, archers hit, so they've inflicted 1 loss on the free folk, and the watchmen miss. So far the free folk have taken 1 hit. The free folk need 3 or less, so we've got 3 of them at 3 or less, so that's 1 missed, 1 missed, and 1 hit, so they've hit one of the enemy. And the big boys, the chief's followers, need a 4, and they hit. You'll notice I'm spreading the hits around the group. And melees are very, very confusing and mixed up things, and so generally speaking I allow the defender, the person receiving the hit, to choose which unit they put the hits on. So I tend to spread the hits across all the units involved. So that's a melee. Now, How do we decide who's won? Very simple. It's whoever has the most hits. So, in this instance of meleeing, the watch have taken 2 hits and the free folk have taken 1 hit. And if there'd been a draw, if both sides had taken hits, the same number of hits, then the attacker withdraws. So in this instance, the free folk would have had to back off if they'd taken equal number of losses, because they were the ones coming on. We think of them as the attacker. In this case, it's quite clear the watch have taken the worst of it. So they must withdraw 1 area, and they must withdraw to the most logical place, or the place they came from. So they came out of the Chapel of Clwg, so they will probably run back into the Chapel of Clwg, because that's the way they know. They will not, unless there's no choice at all, go into places they've not visited before, because obviously you run back the way you came. If you're really unable to reach a reasonable conclusion to that, then get someone from control and they will make a ruling. But actually most of the time it's pretty obvious. So that's the end of 1 combat round. During the update phase we remove the torches because they've burnt out, they only last 1 turn. So you better hope you've got some more in stock. And we go and do team time, negotiation, sort yourselves out, have a bit of a chat, decide what to do next. This entire turn can be resolved in as little as 5 minutes, no minutes if not much is going on, but certainly should never take more than about 15 minutes, even with quite a big and complicated battle. So I hope that's been helpful. Look forward to seeing you at the game.